every person, when he steps into the Madras High Court every day, must be conscious about the legacy that he carries. And he must function in every aspect with responsibility that this huge legacy is part of his own heritage and that he must have a sense of belonging towards it. If we do not cultivate a sense of belonging to our heritage, then we will lose our identity. So it is extremely important that we preserve our identity and contribute to improving the legacy and to enriching this legacy. This is why of course, one of the things that I pride myself in doing and which has not been mentioned in that note is that I also organize a heritage walk of the Madras High Court. And through these heritage walks, which started in 2012 and continued right up till the COVID struck us, incidentally, I completed 50 of these heritage walks by February 2020. And unfortunately, COVID has interrupted that. And I hope to start my heritage walk again, where I take members of the public through the Madras High Court and I explain to them not only the architectural features, but also the legacy of the institution and its rich contribution to the city of Madras and to the development of law in the country. So this is something of a hobby for me, and I'm very glad that close to about 9,000 members of the public have participated in these heritage walks, and many have written to me saying that they have profited by being part of this heritage walks. So unfortunately, I've been interrupted the last 1 year, and it's not been possible for me to do these heritage walks. Therefore, I'm thankful to you for having given me this opportunity to do a virtual tour of the Madras High Court, so to say, which is all oral, of course. I can't take you through the splendid building that Madras High Court is. Right. One of the most gladdening features, as far as I am concerned, is that in the recent 8 years since we started this creating this consciousness about our heritage and the value of the very rich value of not only the Madras High Court but all the courts in Tamil Nadu, there has been an increasing tendency among the local bar associations to be proud of the heritage structures where they practice. Tamil Nadu is quite unique. It has about 82 court buildings which are more than 100 years old. 82. Very few states have that glory, right? And in fact, the Bhavani court is about 1816. And some of these courts are pretty ancient, quite well looked after. And after I became part of the Madras Heritage Committee, and on account of the various proactive steps taken by the Madras Heritage Committee, we have issued very strict instructions to all, to the PWD engineers and to the presiding officers of all these courts that none of these courts shall be in any way, no change shall be made to the structures of this court without getting the permission of the Heritage Committee of the Madras High Court. So till now, these courts have been fairly well preserved, but still our endeavor is to conserve these buildings and bring them back to their original glory. Because unfortunately, over a period of time, there have been constructions that have come up which are not in line with the heritage value of these buildings, which we are now trying to rectify. And this is an ongoing process and will go on for a long time. But 82 court buildings in the state of Tamil Nadu, which are more than 100 years old, is a great record. And we need to be conscious of that. And therefore, it is not only lawyers practicing in the Madras High Court who need to be proud about the heritage and legacy of the Madras High Court, but every lawyer who is practicing in any court in the districts, I think, must be conscious of the heritage of those courts and must work towards preserving it. If that is done, then I would think that all this talk that I do, all the books that I write, I have achieved something in creating that consciousness. But the Madras Heritage Committee itself has taken on the renovation of some of the courts in the city of Madras, other than the High Court. The Egmore Metropolitan Magistrates Court, which is more than 100 years, has been completely renovated. I would request any of you here in Chennai to just visit it and see the renovation work that has been carried out by the PWD. It's an excellent work that has been done under the supervision of the Heritage Committee of the Madras High Court. It has great heritage value, and it is a court that you must all visit. It's more than 100 years old. Simultaneously, work is also happening in the Saidapet Court and in the Georgetown Court, and even those courts will also be restored to that original splendor. Then you have some of these courts are in a pretty bad shape, but still we are trying to bring them back to their original glory because some of them have a historical value. For example, the court that is called the Kudaravandi Court in Coimbatore is more than about 150 years old, and it is in a terribly dilapidated condition. And if any engineer looks at it, the first advice he will give is just put down this building and put up a new structure there. But we have refrained from doing it because it has a historical value. When the famous freedom fighter Pavo Chidambaran was arrested, the jurisdiction to try the offense of sedition would actually have been in the Tuticorin court. But he was not produced before the Tuticorin Magistrates Court because Tuticorin itself was on the boil because people were very angry that Pavo Chidambaran had been arrested. So what the British did is they produced him before the Kudaravandi Court in Coimbatore and then remanded him. It was called Kudaravandi Court because during the British period, it was the equivalent of the motor accident claims tribunal. And when carts were flying without obtaining appropriate permission or were involved in accidents, the offences used to be tried before this court, and therefore it got the name Kudaravandi Court. And Kudaravandi Court is now being restored at a cost of close to 8 crores, and you will soon see it in its original splendor. Likewise, there's the court in Ooty, which is again a very old court. It dates back to 1843, and there is a book on the structures in Ooty, which makes special reference to this structure, which has been in existence from 1843. And because it is too small today to meet the demands of the legal community, there is a proposal to build another court hall and to sort of convert this to a museum. Interestingly, those of you who have visited the Madras High Court will find a wooden canopy above the judge's seat in the second court at the Madras High Court. You will find a very similar canopy in the district judge court at Ooty. The purpose of this canopy is that there was an English judge who was hard of hearing. So in those days, they didn't have hearing aids. So they built a canopy which will reflect the sound and will improve his hearing abilities. Likewise, possibly there was a judge in Ooty who also had a hearing problem, and therefore this canopy has been built above his seat. You then have the Udumalpet Court, which also celebrated, the bar celebrated 100 years of this court, which I think is very encouraging to heritage lovers like me, because now there is a sense of belonging that the bar is conscious of these buildings where they are being practiced. Actually, the Udumal Court is very interesting because it has records from 1885 which show that the court records were entered in Tamil. And the details relating to the cases were entered in Tamil. And it has been preserved like this even during the British period. So that's what is unique about the Udumalpet Court. The Coimbatore Court likewise is undergoing renovation. It is again a beautiful court and is more than 100 years old. The Trichy Court completed its centenary in 2019, and there was a celebration there. If you go there, you will find that there is a plaque which states that this court, the renovation court of this, the renovation work with regard to this court started in 1917, and it was inaugurated by Justice Byrne. And then there is a stone which says that it was inaugurated in 2019, and again the judge who inaugurated is Justice Byrne. So I think one of the very unique features that a judge had an opportunity to go lay both the foundation stone and to inaugurate the building. That court is modeled on the lines of the District and Sessions Court in London. The exact model is used in this building. So that again is a court of heritage value, and there is a lot of work that's been expended to bring this court also back to its original glory. One of the most magnificent magnificent structures next to the Madras High Court is the Pudukkottai Court. And if you go to Pudukkottai, please visit the court to see what a magnificent structure it is. The Maharaja of Pudukkottai was a very progressive monarch. He put up a construction which he wanted that construction to equal the Madras High Court in grandeur, even though not in scale. So he built a very grand structure. And I think that's the only court in Tamil Nadu which still has a statue of the monarch outside the High Court. There are no, the court building does not have a statue of a judge outside the court premises, but you have the statue of the Raja of Pudukkottai still outside the court's complex in Pudukkottai. So there is now an attempt, there is an increasing consciousness about the heritage value of these buildings, and there is attempt now to preserve these buildings and to bring them back to their original glory, in which all of us must participate. It is not somebody who is doing this. In fact, once we started this, we also put in place a system where if you see any garbage in any part of the High Court, you just click it and send it to the registrar. The registrar will immediately ensure that it is cleaned up. And it had been done till we closed on account of the COVID situation. So this once again fosters a sense of belonging, which is so important with regard to these heritage structures and our participation in their preservation. Because all of us, when we enter the High Court, must ensure that we commit ourselves to a course of conduct which ensures that we do not litter the High Court, we do not dirty the High Court. When there are elections, we don't go about sticking posters on the walls of the High Court buildings. We do not in any manner contribute to deterioration of the condition of these buildings. This is a solemn obligation, and I think the 129th anniversary of this building is an occasion on which we must all take the pledge to preserve these heritage structures. Now, the High Court campus itself is a fascinating place. Over a period of time, we have constantly kept building. We've been building at even when I joined the profession in 1986, there was so much of orchard space where the annex court stands today. There was a lovely orchard, and we would all go and sit there for some time. And it used to be so pleasant and calming. But unfortunately, we have put buildings all over. But the High Court campus itself, when it was originally founded, housed not only the High Court, but it also housed the Small Causes Court building. That is why it was the second largest court campus in the world after the Chancery Courts in London, court complex. Because today you have High Courts which occupy much larger areas than what the Madras High Court occupies. But when it was founded in 1892, it was the second largest campus, the court complex in the entire world. And then its exteriors are really unique. You have this red prashad, and you have engravings, and you have several unique features of architectural interest. And it is a great amalgam of various values that existed in society in 1892. It is Indo-Saracenic. Indo-Saracenic is an art form which celebrated the Islamic and the Hindu forms of architecture and produced a combination of these two schools of thought as far as architecture is concerned. One of the first expression of this Indo-Saracenic form of art is the Chepauk Palace, the palace of the Nawab of Carnatic, and it is the first building which incorporated this wealth of Islamic architecture and Hindu architecture into public buildings. After that, one of the greatest structures and one of the finest manifestations of Indo-Saracenic architecture is undoubtedly the Madras High Court. So the exterior is Indo-Saracenic architecture, and I think it does not stop with just integrating Islamic and Hindu architecture. It also integrates the Christian architecture, the stained glasses, which are reminiscent of churches and cathedrals in India and in the European countries, is a distinct Christian feature. And there is also a bit of a symbolism in all this, which I think happened. For example, Nambarmal Shetty is the contractor, and Henry Irwin is the architect of this building. Nambarmal Shetty, as you know, Srirangam's presiding deity, one of the presiding deities in Srirangam is Nambarmal. And Nambarmal Shetty was a great devotee of Srirangam. So, to my reading, Madras High Court has 21 towers, 21 domes, right? And Srirangam has 21 towers. So, somewhere, Nambarmal Shetty wanted this expression of his own beliefs. I don't think Henry Irwin allowed him to just get away with that, because if you view the Madras High Court, if you have an aerial view of the Madras High Court, it is shaped like a cross. So somewhere Henry Irwin also incorporated his own beliefs, which is all very, very wonderful, because then we have a structure which is an amalgam of different beliefs which existed in the country in 1892 when this institution was established. The interior again is a grand display of variety, which you would not see in any other court. The first court in the Madras High Court, especially, amalgamates so many different forms. It has dadu, it has designs beyond in the stained glass behind the Chief Justice's desk. It is the only court in India where there is a library right behind the Chief Justice's chair, and there is a swing door which operates. And when I cite a decision, at least today, you can pull out a Xerox copy of the decision. In those days, the swing door operated, and the court officer would go behind the Chief Justice and pull out that book from the book racks there. So that again is a unique feature of that court hall. And what is most stunning is the sheer variety. Nothing is repeated. You just walk through the Madras High Court and you will see that it is a rich assortment of ideas of local craftsmen and local artisans which went into creating that building. That's why it is so splendid, because the innumerable manifestations of these ideas that flowed from local artisans and craftsmen find expression in this building, which is once again a symbol of celebration of our diversity, and which is have to be carefully guarded. If you go to Humayun's tomb in Delhi, you will find certain structures which are once again being copied in the Madras High Court. And if you go to visit various mosques in Delhi, you will find these domes, which the rich architecture of those domes have once again been copied in the Madras High Court building. And if you walk through the, as I said, the cathedrals of Europe, you will find these grand stained glasses, which expression you will find once again in the Madras High Court. So it's such a rich amalgam, and which is what makes this such a glorious building. And it also seeks to remind us of the diversity, which is what makes our society and which is what makes our country. So that is what is so grand about our interiors. Then you have the octagonal square, in which you find the octagonal area where you find the statue of Muthuswami Iyer. I will come to this glory as we go along. But that again is one of the unique features of the Madras High Court. And you will find actually the statue was put up about 3 to 4 years after the building was constructed. So you will find 4 pillars in the ground floor to support that statue. That statue was built by a sculptor called George Wade. We walk by that statue, but many of us don't notice the name of the sculptor being written on the side of that statue. So that is what is unique about that statue. George Wade was actually the sculptor for the British royalty. And it is to the credit of Arthur Collins that he had such reverence for Muthuswami Iyer that he had the Royal Sculptor of England to sculpt the statue of Muthuswami Iyer. And George Wade never saw Muthuswami Iyer. So he must have created all this from a photograph of Muthuswami Iyer. And he has done a great job of creating the resemblance in that statue. And once again, the unique aspect of this statue is that when the statue was thought to be installed in the Madras High Court, there was a section of lawyers who actually protested against the statue being put up. And why did they protest against the statue being put up? They said that these statues are not typical of Indian culture, right? They are actually reminiscent of British and European culture. Please don't bring this culture into India. Because they said under Hindu belief, it's only a god which can have an idol. In Islamic belief, which is also part of the important part of the country, even God cannot have an idol. So we never celebrate our heroes and our leaders with statues. So don't bring it here. But Author Collins was such a great fan of Buddha that he installed that statue in that octagonal area. And Buddha was such a respected figure that the British Parliament observed a minute of silence for an Indian jurist when he passed away. So that is why that area of the High Court today is almost a reverent, a very revered and a sacred spot. And right opposite to Justice Mutsami here, we have the statue of Rajamannar. I'm going to come to his contributions to the Madras High Court a little later. And that Rajamannar Hall is once again a unique feature of the Madras High Court. It was used as a meeting hall earlier, but as has been happening almost on a year-to-year basis, the strength of lawyers in the Madras High Court is growing phenomenally. And that hall did not have enough space to accommodate them. So many of the meetings today are held in the Judges Court Hall, and the judiciary sorts of allows even Lawyers Association to use that hall. So Rajamannar Hall is again unique, and the portraits in that hall as and the plaques which sort of declare the people who were the names of the persons who officiated as judges of the Madras High Court. Then you have the libraries. There are three principal libraries in addition to a library hall, which is no longer used as either a library or a court hall, but it has been renovated beautifully. And I'm sure that the High Court is going to put it to some use in the near future. So you have the main Chief Justice's library hall, then you have the hall of the MBA, and then you have two libraries of the Madras High Court Advocates Association. One is the main hall, which is also the hall of the association, which actually is a library. And then there is a court hall, which is now being converted into a library. So there are two libraries of the Madras High Court Advocates Association. The Madras Bar Association's library was also a court hall, and that got converted into a library. And then, of course, you have the advocates' chambers, which was the facility of an advocate chamber was not available when the High Court originally started functioning in 1862. So in 1862, the High Court did not have it functioned from a building called the Bentix building, which is where the Singaravelar Madigai today stands. But with the type of commitment that we have to our heritage values, unfortunately, this building was pulled down. And in that place, the Singaravelar Madigai has been put up. It is very unfortunate that we do not give importance to these heritage structures and keep going around demolishing them, which is why the Heritage Committee of the Madras High Court has made it very clear that no heritage structure in the state will be even touched without the permission of the Madras Heritage Committee, as far as the court buildings are concerned. Then you have, of course, the quadrangle, which is where the 9th, 10th, 11th courts are. That again is a unique feature of the Madras High Court. The belief is that in 1892, when the High Court started, some of the small causes court buildings functioned from that court because you didn't have so many judges. In fact, when the Madras High Court was established in 1862, it only had about five judges presiding. And for a long time, that number did not increase. So you did not require so many court halls. So the small causes court functioned from some of them, and then it got shifted to where the MHAA library currently is. And then from 1930s, a separate building came to be constructed for the small causes court, which once again is a beautiful and a lovely structure, and a small causes court got shifted there. So the advocate chamber was therefore on the western wing of the court, and it functioned from there. And that again is a unique feature of the Madras High Court buildings. Then you have two structures which no court in India has. No High Court in India has these structures. One is the old lighthouse, and the other is what we call the new lighthouse. New lighthouse, that is new lighthouse compared as contradistinction with the old lighthouse. The old lighthouse, which we have now converted into a photographic exhibition, the base of that, the lighthouse, has been converted to a photographic exhibition on two themes, which is Madras, the first modern city of India. In fact, I will need a separate talk to talk about how Madras was the really modern city of India. And when I'm talking about India, I'm talking about India that included Pakistan and Bangladesh. This is where everything started. We had the first school, which is the St. George's School, which is still in Punamalli, which came up 350 years before. We had the first hospital, which is today the government hospital. It originally functioned, the Western type hospital. It was originally functioned from Fort St. George and then went through various avatars, and now it exists as the government hospital. You had the first engineering college in any part of India, which is today the Gindi Engineering College. The first advocate general from any part of India was from Madras, and that glory goes to the Madras High Court. The first trial by a jury in front of a jury was once again is the trial of the famous murder of and accused of Asantia Davis. That once again, the first trial happened in Madras. So Madras really was a home to several innovations and initiatives, and Madras truly is the first modern city of India. That is the theme around which that photographic exhibition, part of that photographic exhibition in the old lighthouse is established. And the other part of the exhibition is about the greats in the legal profession who have contributed. And the determining factor that we took on was not a legal luminary, right? If I am to list all the legal luminaries of the Madras High Court, I possibly would have had to put up some 350 or 400 portraits in that small space. But what we concentrated on was people who have contributed to the development of the country, who have contributed to the development of Madras, who have contributed to the development of uh, some field phenomenally. For example, Avai Shanmugam, who contributed to development of Tamil drama. Even today, his encyclopedia on Tamil drama, which is in 6 volumes, is the greatest work of Tamil drama ever written. And he was judge of the small causes court, and he started a drama troupe called the Sugana Vilas, and it reached great heights. And therefore, people from our profession have also been instrumental in the development of the arts, in development of music, in development of, and have also contributed to the freedom struggle, have contributed to the development of so many institutions in the country, as also in the state of the city of Madras. Two of the most outstanding, three of the most outstanding institutions, which we can refer to legal luminaries which can trace back to the efforts of legal luminaries, are Ethiraj College, which is founded by V.L. Ethiraj. Part of it was his house, and he gave up his house for the development of education of women. The second is the Bashir Ahmad Saeed, Justice Bashir Ahmad Saeed was instrumental in founding SIET, the Institution for Educating Muslim Women, which at that point of time in history was such phenomenally progressive thought. And then you had the Vivekananda College, which came about on account of the efforts of Subraya, who went around collecting funds, and to which one of the greatest donors was Alladi Krishnani Iyer. So these institutions are testimony to great people who have been part of the Madras University. A great institution is just not made up by the building. It is made up by the character of people who are part of that building. Therefore, these are people who have contributed to the development of the nation and to development of various fields and for improvement of the educational field, the field of arts and music, and for the development, of course, of law. So that is what is important about the old lighthouse. Actually, it was not located in the place where you see it today. It was sort of located in the center of the High Court and then was shifted to where it is today when the High Court building came up. That's because the High Court building had to be accommodated, and this building was this the old lighthouse was made dysfunctional, and was you can't have multiple lighthouses in any place because the ships that are coming towards the harbor will then get confused because there are too many lighthouses. So as and when a new lighthouse gets commissioned, the old lighthouse will get decommissioned. So the lighthouse that came up originally in about 1848 was the old lighthouse. And then the tallest tower of the Madras High Court is the second lighthouse. Actually, the third lighthouse. The first lighthouse was on the top of what is today Fort Museum. It was the Fort Exchange, and the first lighthouse was on top of that. The second lighthouse is the old lighthouse, which is inside the Madras High Court campus. And the third lighthouse is the tallest tower of the Madras High Court. And the fourth lighthouse is the lighthouse that you see on the Marina today. So Madras High Court has a unique privilege of having two lighthouses within its campus, which no court in the country has. So these are the unique architectural features of the Madras High Court. As I said, court is just not made up of just the building. The building, of course, is wonderful. The building is unique. The building is fascinating. There can be no two opinions about that. But it is just not the building that gives character to an institution. So it is the people who are part of that building that make up the character of that institution. This is what we need to be conscious about, and we need to be conscious about the contributions made by several luminaries and stalwarts in the legal profession to building the character of that institution. I'm just going to briefly, because the history of the Madras High Court, the legacy of the Madras High Court, this is a large canvas to paint on. But I'm going to briefly trace about 5 to 6 points the evolution of this institution. How did it come about as an institution? We must start with the establishment of Fort St. George itself. In 1639, the British decided that they will set up Fort St. George because the price of long cloth in Musalipattanam kept shooting up. So they decided that they will migrate from Musalipattanam and set up a place where cloth would be available cheaper, the artisans will be more skilled, and the labor would be cheap. So they came to this brief strip of land. The negotiations were carried on by two gentlemen. There is a bit of controversy as to whether they were gentlemen at all. So Francis Day and Andrew Covel. The Francis Day and Andrew Covel then negotiated with the Raja of Chandragiri and on behalf of the East India Company established Fort St. George at Madras Pattanam. There is a bit of a controversy as to whether Madras Pattanam, the name Madras, was given to us by the British. It is my own strong belief that the name Madras was not given to us by the British, and the name Madras Pattanam actually existed from the 9th century AD. There is epigraphical evidence to support this, and more importantly, the firman. Today you have GOs. In those days, you should have the firman. The firman granted by the Raja of Chandragiri to East India Company says that you are permitted to establish Fort St. George in Madras Pattanam. If Fort St. George is permitted to be set up in Madras Pattanam by the Raja of Chandragiri, it is very clear evidence that Madras Pattanam existed before the British came to Madras. And it is very unfortunate that on account of this ill-conceived notion that Madras Pattanam was a name given to us by the British, we changed the name of Madras Pattanam to Chennai. Madras to Chennai. We are glad that Madras High Court continues to remain the High Court of Judicature at Madras, and it has not changed to High Court of Judicature at Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry. If you want to change it, you have to change it that way. Or that it is the High Court of Judicature at Chennai And there is a reason why you can't change the name of institutions like Madras High Court just like that. For example, today, IIT Madras is still IIT Madras. Madras University is still Madras University. It's not IIT Chennai University. The reason is that these are institutions of learning. For many of us who come into the institution, we think that these are just institutions of learning. They are institutions where we earn our livelihood, but it doesn't stop there. These are institutions of learning. In fact, there is an English professor in Oxford University who taught Hindu law, where he writes in the 1960s, Professor Barrett, who says that if you have any doubt as to whether a proposition of Hindu law is right, please look to judgments of the Madras High Court. He says ultimately you will find it is the propositions of Hindu law laid down by the Madras High Court which are upheld by the Supreme Court. It's a great tribute to the Madras High Court. So any scholar who is trying to look at case laws and cases that have been decided by the courts in India will obviously today go to Google and search for decisions of the Madras High Court. And if you're going to change the name to Chennai High Court or Tamil Nadu High Court, a scholar sitting in the US or a scholar sitting in Europe is not going to know that the name of the High Court is being changed. So this results in our whatever are our outputs in the judicial field not reaching other corners of the world. Therefore, we need to ensure that the name of the High Court is not changed from High Court of Madras. When there is a move to do that, I actually got a signature from all the members of MBA and MHA and sent a representation to the law minister to say that please don't change the name of the High Court. This is the reason why it should remain Madras High Court, and thankfully the name has not changed. So when the Fort St. George came up in Madras Pattinam, the British permitted the establishment of Fort St. George in Madras Pattinam in 1639, and it is from there. When the British rule first came to India, it had its roots first in Madras. Then it shifted to Calcutta, and then from there it went to Delhi. So this was a voyage that the empire, so to say, took, the colonial empire took. But its foundation was very much in Madras. That's why much of modern India started here. And once the fort came to be established here, it was necessary to set in place a proper legal regime by which the legal issues that confronted the company, the East India Company, could be resolved. So we had a long line of charters which were issued by the British Crown, empowering authorities to deal with legal issues in India. And one of the first institutions which was empowered to do this was the Madras Corporation. When the Madras Corporation was established in 1688, it was the second oldest British corporation in any part of the world. Right? It is the second oldest, even today, it is the second oldest British corporation that has been established in any part of the world. The St. Mary's Church within the fort complex is the oldest British colonial building in any part of Asia, just not India, any part of Asia, right? So these are unique aspects of British rule from Madras, which are actually part of our legacy, which is today celebrated in the Madras Day celebrations quite grandly by the citizens of Madras. It's again a very, very welcome development. And therefore, once the corporation, Madras Corporation, was established, its mayor and aldermen were authorized to resolve disputes between parties. And originally, the charter said that they will have authority only to deal with disputes between the British, but over a period of time, this kept expanding. And the British rule, as it set in in a more determined way in various parts of the country and all over the country, the legal system also started spreading its branches. So one of the other important charters that came up was the Charter of 1753. But I must tell you, in the brief while between 1746 and 1749, Madras came to be attacked by the French. Lord Dupleix from Pondicherry attacked Madras, and Madras was captured by the French and was made a French territory. Robert Clive escaped. He dressed as a woman. He escaped and went to Kadalur, where he set up Fort St. David. And then from reinforcements, he came back to capture Madras, and ultimately through a treaty, which is called the Treaty of La Chapelle, Nova Scotia in Canada, which has by that time been captured by the British, was given in exchange for Madras, which the French had occupied. So on account of this treaty, British got back Madras and the French got back Nova Scotia. So for these three periods, all the court systems ceased to exist in Madras, and the French really were scratching their head trying to figure out what they will do and what type of a system they will establish. But by that time, this entire system came back, the British system came back to us. And as soon as it came back to us, one of the first things they did was in 1753, they proclaimed this charter. This charter is very interesting because it is this charter which establishes the courts in the Madras Presidency, in Calcutta Presidency, and in Bombay Presidency. So it's a very unique document. The original of this document is in the Madras Museum. Of course, Calcutta and Bombay have been asking us that we will display it in our museum. You can have it 1 year, or the next year we will have it. But this is too valuable a document. It has been preserved very well. And the Madras High Court has said that it is not advisable to do that. And therefore, it continues to remain with us. Then in 1773 came the regulations because the British realized that they need to have a more foundationally solid system to administer justice in India. And therefore, the 1773 regulations came into effect. And following the 1773 regulations, the Supreme Court at Calcutta came to be established. But the Supreme Court at Calcutta turned out to be a disaster. The judges were directly appointed by the Crown. They felt that they owed nothing to the East India Company. The East India Company found that many of the orders that were passed by the company were set aside by the Supreme Court at Calcutta, and they found that it was impossible for them to recover dues to the company. They wrote back to England and said that if you're going to give us judges who did not have any idea of the customs of the people, of the tradition of the people, of the laws of the people, of the commercial transactions, and the manner in which they were carried out in India, it is going to be very difficult for us to send anybody back to the British Crown. So ultimately, there was a sort of a reworking, and the wings of the judges of the Calcutta High Court came to be clipped. The Supreme Court at Calcutta came to be clipped. The situation in Madras was no better. The East India Company, basically the officers of the East India Company were very corrupt. Right? The East India Company is a company which by no yardstick can go bankrupt, but that is what happened to them during 1770s. You will be amazed that the company went bankrupt, but some of its officers kept getting wealthier and wealthier, including Robert Clive and Warren Hastings. Robert Clive's family is still one of the most wealthiest families in England, even today. And that is the type of you will, if you go to England, take the effort to visit a castle called the Powis Castle. Powis Castle is the home of Robert Clive's family. You will find so many artifacts from India still in that castle. So that is the amount of plunder that these officers of the East India Company indulged in, and therefore the East India Company itself went into problems, and it had to be bailed out by the British government. So the situation was no better in Madras, and therefore the British government decided that they will send across a judge to put all this right. And they sent across one of the finest legal luminaries that the world legal history would ever see, which is Sir Thomas Strange. Sir Thomas Strange has a portrait of him in the Chief's Court at Madras, a portrait which he well deserves because he was the person who infused into the legal system character, learning, integrity, hard work, and set up example to others. For 17 years, he was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at Madras, and it is during this time that all these traits of the judiciary that we today revere and respect were infused into the system by Sir Thomas Strange, and that's why he has a portrait in the first court at Madras. And as far as his learning goes, he was extremely curious. about the laws that apply to the Indians, and he held frequent conversation with Hindu priests and Muslim mullahs to understand what type of laws apply to them. And in fact, there is generally what people generally don't know is that he was the first to bring out a treatise on Hindu law, a book titled Elements of Hindu Law. I was able to pull out a copy of that book from the archives, Madras archives, and a copy of that is now available with the High Court. And we have taken a copy, and the Madras Bar Association has also got a copy of the book. This was written in 1817, when it was extremely difficult for an Englishman to understand even the language in which the Indian laws were written, and he tried to understand them and writes a brilliant book on Hindu law in 1870. So it is just not character; it was also the levels of his learning which were impressive. And he, as I said, contributed to the Supreme Court of Madras becoming a very revered institution. And as time went on, the Supreme Court of Madras contributed to the development of Madras presidency. And one of the ways in which they contributed to the establishment of Madras University is that the Supreme Court of Madras was responsible in a large measure for the eminence of the Madras University. For a long time, the connection between Madras University and the High Court was established. So the Supreme Court of Madras and the High Court. The first um, um, Vice Chancellor of the Madras University, you can go into Wikipedia and look it up. The first Vice Chancellor of the Madras University was a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of India, of the Madras, who was Rawlinson. And Rawlinson was responsible for the university reaching levels of eminence for which it is revered even today. And one of the rich finds of Rawlinson was C.V. Raghunatha Shastri. He is again one of the unsung heroes of our Indian judiciary. Rawlinson found this man was his, so to say, an assistant to Rawlinson, but he found that this man was enormously gifted. He knew 17 languages. He was a court interpreter, and he used 17 languages. In those times, for you to be a court interpreter, because the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court at Madras and later the Madras High Court was the entire Madras presidency. And the Madras presidency stretched from Orissa in the north to Kanyakumari in the south, save for the princely states of Nizam of Hyderabad, the Maharaja of Mysore, the Travancore states. Everything else that was left out all fell within the British rule and the colonial empire. And Madras presidency stretched. Therefore, the courts in Madras, you need to be an expert in several languages for you to be a court interpreter in Madras. Because look at it, you need to know English, you need to know Tamil, you need to know Telugu, Urdu, Persian, Kannada, Malayalam. At least these 7 languages you need to know, because the documents used to be in these languages and the people could understand. The judges could, English judges could understand only if they had the help of a very effective interpreter. And C.V. Raghunatha Shastri fitted this bill excellently, and therefore he was a great favor of Rawlinson. But when an opportunity came to appoint an Indian to the post of the Chief Justice of the Small Causes Court, he took that opportunity and appointed C.V. Raghunatha Shastri to that post. His great grandson is Justice C.V. Karthikeyan of the Madras High Court. So he is therefore C.V. Raghunatha Shastri is one of the first heroes, I should say, of the judiciary. And then you had Muthuswami Iyer. We all know the story of rags to riches. He actually grew up in chill penury, as it is called, absolute poverty. He did not even, the household did not even have money to buy oil for this poor gentleman to study for his examination. In spite of such chilling adversities, he managed to do very well in his examinations, and he became the subordinate judiciary. And when England wanted to appoint a judge to the Madras High Court, they requested Justice Holloway to do the search and to come up with 3 names. Holloway sent a note to England saying that these are the 3 names that you should consider. And the 3 names were T. Muthuswami Iyer, T. Muthuswami Iyer, T. Muthuswami Iyer. So Holloway had no doubt in his mind that the only person who would be qualified to adorn the post of judge of the High Court was Muthuswamy Iyer, and therefore he came to be appointed. And then, as the functioning of the High Court became more complex, it had to take on more and more judges. And then you had Justice Subramanian Iyer. Actually, um, Justice Subramanian Iyer and Mr. V. Krishnasamy Iyer, again, a member of the bar, a towering personality. Both of them contributed enormously to the Madras University. And therefore, when you write down Beach Road, when you just look on the left, you will find these two gentlemen adorning the campus of the Madras University, and their statues are put up there. So this once again is evidence that stalwarts in the profession this did not stop with enriching the Madras High Court, but also enriched the society with their learning, with their efforts, and with their character. Another remarkable person that we need to know is V.L. Ethiraj. V.L. Ethiraj was appointed as a public prosecutor to the Madras High Court. The British had no problem in appointing an Indian to the post of advocate general because much of it was civil law. But they had a lot of compunctions when it came to public prosecutor because that was a very sensitive area. And it is to the credit of V.L. Ethiraj that he functioned phenomenally well as a public prosecutor. And in fact, when he was appointed, there was a full court meeting of the judges to welcome him, which again is a unique honor given to an Indian. And he discharged his responsibility with great impartiality and a real dedication to the rule of law. The other person that comes to our mind is Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer. And Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer, as you know, assisted Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in drafting the Indian Constitution. In fact, at the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Ambedkar was gracious enough to say that I don't know when people like Dr. Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer are part of the Constituent Assembly, why I should be the chairman. That is the greatness of Ambedkar, that he acknowledged the legal evidence of Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer, and we must be proud that of the 5 people who were originally constituted to look into the Constitution, 2 came from the Madras High Court. And therefore, these are great achievements of the stalwarts of yesteryears, which we need to be proud of. I will stop with mentioning the achievements of Rajamannar. Rajamannar was the first Indian to be made a Chief Justice of the Madras High Court, full-fledged Chief Justice. Of course, Muthuswamy Iyer had been an acting Chief Justice. Subramanian Iyer had been an acting Chief Justice. Venkata Subbarao had been an acting Chief Justice. But Rajamannar was the first full-time Chief Justice of the Madras High Court, a man who was known for his learning. Not only was he known for his learning, he was also known for his penchant for art, the works of art in the field of music, in the field of dance. He was so knowledgeable in that he was even made the president of the Sahitya Academy, which is, as you all know, is a very renowned institution. And he strode like a colossus for nearly 13 to 14 years after the Constitution came into effect and set the pace, the tone, and much of what we today owe as being the central character of the Madras. Therefore, I don't want to take more of your time. It's a Friday evening, and anything more may, I'm sure, bore you. So I hope I have given you a bird's eye view of why our heritage is important to us, why these buildings and structures are so much part of our history and so much part of our own identity, and why it is just not the buildings that are important to us, but the character, integrity, and learning of the people who went into creating these great institutions, and why we must be consciously conscious of this great legacy and must function every minute with the thought that we must do nothing to which would be a detriment to this great name which this institution bears, but must constantly contribute to the evidence of this institution.